All right, we're going to continue our lecture on chapter 6. So how well memories are recalled really do depend on the way that the information or the material was first received, how it was processed, and to what level it was understood. So how well it was understood. The level of processing theory actually emphasizes the degree to which new material is mentally analyzed. So, this theory suggests that the amount of information processing that occurs when the material is initially encountered, so when that information is coming in, um, the amount of processing it goes through is central or vital in determining how much of the information is actually remembered in the end. Right? According to this approach, the depth of information processing during exposure to material, so how well it's analyzed, whether or not it's considered or we pay attention to it, that is critical, right? The greater the intensity of its initial processing, the more likely we are to remember it. So, what that's saying is the more attention we pay to the incoming information, then it is processed more thoroughly. Okay. And it allows the material to be analyzed for meaning and context and most likely transferred to long term memory. Whereas more shallow information, so things we're simply not paying that much attention to, like sensory aspects. So, how your elbow feels when you walk past a wall and you lightly brush the wall. How warm the room is compared to the room outside of it. That's sensory information that you're certainly taking in that information and processing it, but it's not that important, right? It doesn't really matter what the wall feels like against your elbow at 12:30 in the afternoon when you're walking to the kitchen getting your lunch, right? That sensory information isn't important. You don't pay that much attention to it and it's lost, right? In that moment, you know exactly what that wall feels like, but after a second or so, you don't remember anymore. So that's more shallow information. We don't pay as much attention to it. And when that happens, it doesn't go through that in depth processing. It's not analyzed and it's not essentially saved or stored in the long term memory. So, another example of this would be the depth at which information is processed when studying for a course or an exam is very, very important, right? Rote memorization, which some people will do when they're studying for an exam, they'll just memorize a list of items, but that's unlikely to produce the long term recollection of the information that you actually need when you're recalling it on an exam. Because this rote memorization results in the information being processed at a much more shallow level, right? You're just trying to sort of memorize these terms, but you're not looking into the context or the meaning or further investigation of those terms. You're just memorizing a list. Um, and so you're less likely to process those at any depth. But when you're thinking about the meaning of the terms, right, you're reflecting how they might relate to information you already learned or experiences you've had in your life, or maybe things you're learning in another course that they correspond to. So, this type of thinking results in more in depth processing, which then results in greater long term retention. So, that's essentially what we need to get to store memories in the long term. It's this more in-depth level of processing the information. Now, research has shown that there are two types of long-term memory. There is explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory is the intentional or constant conscious recollection of information. So it's actively trying to remember a name of a person you already met, or a specific day or date when you did something. Okay, so that's explicit memory. It's intentional and it's conscious. You're aware of it when you're actively trying to remember something. Whereas implicit memory is the memories that you're not consciously aware of, but these can still affect your behavior and performance. So things like prejudice and discrimination often do occur within this type of memory. So let's say you come across someone and you just sort of dislike them, but you don't really know why. It may be that they remind you of someone or maybe a place or an event that you have a negative feeling associated with, but you can't really remember what it was that you disliked about that place or event or other person. You just know that it was a negative feeling. And now this person you're in contact with is giving you that same negative feeling and you don't like them. Okay. So you're not fully aware of the why behind it, but it is happening because of a memory. Behaviors that you may engage in automatically or without thinking also fall under the implicit memory. So things like jumping out of the way of a car that's coming towards you, especially if it's coming towards you very quickly, you don't take a lot of time to think, right? Typically, you're not going to stand there and think, oh, should I go to the left? Should I go to the right? Should I jump up? Should I, you don't sit there and really assess the situation. You just react. And that comes from implicit memory of maybe, over time and through your history, you've gotten out of the way of things that are moving towards you to make sure that you stay safe. And so now when something like that happens, you just react. Now, one way researchers study this sort of implicit or automatic memory is through a process called priming. So, this is where you're exposed to a word or a concept called a prime, and you're not really aware that you're being exposed to it, but you are. And then later, it's easier to recall the information that has been related to that prime. Um, Advertisers do this all the time, right? They use concepts or words in a commercial, and then later, when you're in the presence of that object, you remember it, right? It might be a little jingle or a song. It might be a feeling that a commercial gives you. Maybe the commercial makes you laugh or makes you smile. Um, the Coke commercials when the people drink the Coke and they're like hot and then they open that crisp cold Coke and it makes that bubbly noise and they take a drink and they're like, it's so satisfying to watch that happen. And then when you're in the presence of Coke, you're sort of primed, right, to want that item. You recall that information that you learned previously from the commercial, even if you weren't paying that close attention to it, right? Even if it's just playing in the background and you're on your phone, you're still primed, essentially. So researchers will do this in various uh, experiments where they flash a word or an image very quickly and you see it, but you don't really consciously remember it. But you actually later you're able to recall it when you're shown other stimuli that relate to that original image or word or the prime that you were shown. So that's how researchers sort of investigate and look at how these implicit or unconscious or automatic memories work. Now, we also have something called flashbulb memories. And these are memories that are related to a specific, important, or maybe surprising event that is so vivid that it represents sort of a virtual snapshot of the event, right? We call this a flashbulb memory. So maybe remembering a really bad car accident you were in, or recalling exactly where you were and what you were doing when 9/11 happened. Some of you are quite young. You may not have even been born, maybe, when 9/11 happened. Um, I was in high school when that happened, so I remember where I was and what I was doing. Or maybe remembering the details of your senior grad night, right? Or of high school graduation. So, all of these are examples of flashbulb memories. But flashbulb memories don't necessarily contain all of the details from a memory. In fact, many details are likely to be missing. And these memories aren't always accurate or complete, especially if they involve some sort of highly emotional event. So, in general, memories that are exceptional or rare or don't happen very often, those are more easily retrieved than those events that are fairly common, right? Things that happen to you on a daily basis. That you're less likely to remember those as vividly as something that only happens once in your lifetime, right? So, the more distinctive a stimulus is, or the more personal relevance it has, the more likely it is that you'll be able to recall it later. But as I mentioned before, recalling information about these events may not always be 100% accurate. Source amnesia can occur where you have a memory of something, but you can't really remember where you encountered it. So you remember the information, but you don't really remember everything surrounding that information or how you learned it. So, for example, I've given this example before, but this is an example of source amnesia. You might run into someone you recognize, and you're sure you've met them before, but you can't place where you know them from, right? So you see someone's face. I mean, I've gone to all sorts of social events in the past, and I'll see someone, I'll be like, "Gosh, your face looks so familiar," but I don't know where I would know you from or where I might have met you before. Sometimes it's on campus, right? So teaching classes, and when I was a student taking classes, you meet a lot of people. Sometimes you don't even actually meet someone, but maybe you just see them in a lot of your classes because if you're the same major, right, you're taking a lot of similar courses. So there were often people that I'd never actually met, I'd never actually spoken to, I don't know their name, but I'd taken several classes with them because we were all in the same major. But then if I see them somewhere else, because I'd never really met them officially, I might not really know where I know them from, right? If you see them out of context of school, I might say, "Gosh, that person looks so familiar," but I don't know where I know them from, right? So that's called source amnesia. Now, although we can have very detailed recollections of significant and distinctive events, it is still difficult to gauge how accurate our memories actually are. And it is apparent that our memories reflect a sort of constructive sort of process where memories are influenced by the meaning we give to the events that surround them. Um, when we retrieve information, the memory that is produced is affected not just by the prior experience we had, but also by our guesses and inferences about the meaning of that information. So it's not just what you're not just recalling the information that you were exposed to before, but you're also recalling how you interpreted that information, right? How you interpreted that event that happened to you that you're remembering, how you interpreted how that person treated you that you're remembering from a past event, or how that person made you feel, or how good or bad an experience was. It's affected not only by the actual event and the actual facts of what happened, but how we interpret it and how we feel about it, right? That's also playing into how we recall or remember that information. It's influenced by those things. Now, schemas, which we have talked about before, this is how we categorize information, right? So we organize the information we receive and we store it in our memory using schemas, right? Categories of things. And because we store information this way, our memories often consist of reconstruction about a previous experience, and are influenced by this, right? They're influenced by these different categories that you've placed memories in and how they're related to other categories. Additionally, our emotions can greatly influence our memories. So often, events that are attached to positive experiences are better remembered or recalled more easily, right? Than maybe those events that are associated with negative experiences. We may not be able to recall those details as well or as easily. Okay, so our emotions or the emotions we experience surrounding the memory also will influence how well and to what detail we can recall that memory. Um, so these factors that influence our memories can actually even lead to false or inaccurate memories altogether. And in fact, false memories have occurred many times in the case of eyewitness testimony, right? And this is really problematic because the justice system often relies on eyewitness testimonies for convictions, right? But these have found, and research has shown, that eyewitness accounts are largely inaccurate. Um, Research has suggested that eyewitnesses are highly prone to memory related areas, which again can problematically lead to false convictions. Things that can influence these things. So, as I just mentioned before, emotions surrounding an event can influence your memory of it, right? And when people are witness a crime or an event that is emotionally charged, they can recall things inaccurately. So, if they witness perhaps a robbery, the impact of a weapon can often result in inaccurate memory of the event. Once someone sees a weapon, okay, if you see someone threatening you or threatening someone near you with a weapon of some kind, that's where your focus is. Okay. Your focus is primarily on the weapon itself, not on any other detail of the event, including what the person who is actually holding the weapon looks like. So think about that, right? We're asking them to identify the person who robbed the store and was holding the weapon, but it's been proven time and time again that they're focused on the weapon, not on the person's face, right? Not on recalling what the person looks like. And yet they will pick someone out of a lineup, right? And say, yes, that man was the one holding the weapon, or that woman was the one holding the weapon. But it's been shown that they're not looking at those details. They're focused on the weapon. So they can't really give an accurate description of anything else that happened. And we shouldn't be relying on that testimony in those cases. Um, Another thing that can impact eyewitness testimony is the way in which questions are asked by police officers or even attorneys. So the way the questions are worded can result in an inaccurate recalling of information by the witness. So it's not to say that eyewitness testimonies are useless, but you just have to sort of take them with a grain of salt, especially if they're being used to convict someone, to prison. If you're going to take someone's life away, essentially, and punish them for something, we probably shouldn't only base their conviction on an eyewitness testimony. There should be other evidence that is presented that shows whether or not that person is guilty or innocent. Research has also shown that the relationship between the eyewitnesses' confidence and their actual accuracy is actually very small or even negative. So, what this means is just because the eyewitness is confident, so even if you have an eyewitness who never changes their story, who's extremely confident, they say, I know what I saw, this is what I saw. Confidence doesn't mean accuracy. Okay, so it doesn't mean that they're actually accurately recalling the details of the event, even though they're confident that they are. Here's an example of a study that looked at the phrasing of questions. So similar to those that are used in eyewitness testimonies when they're taking someone's statement. So here, a group of participants has shown a video of a car that gets into an accident. And then part of the group is asked the questions of what happened when the cars smashed into each other, while another part of the group was asked the question using a different word than smash. So they were asked instead, what happens when the cars hit, or what happened when the cars contacted each other. And as you can see from that black and white bar graph, those that were asked how fast the cars were going when they were contacted, they estimated a much lower speed than those who were asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. So you see the difference there. Additionally, more people claimed they saw broken glass when they were asked what they saw when the cars smashed into each other, whereas the group who was asked if they saw glass when the cars just hit each other, much fewer said they saw that. So you can see how just one word changed the question. They're just changing that one word can affect how people recall and report on events that they see. There are also memories known as repressed memories, which is the idea that we have some memories that are so shocking or traumatizing that may have happened to you that the mind actually pushes them into the unconscious. And this is based on a psychoanalytic theory or viewpoint. So, supporters of this view state that these repressed memories might remain hidden, possibly even for the person's entire lifetime or until they're triggered by some circumstance. An example would be being probed to remember these things during maybe a psychological therapy session. But these memories are pretty controversial, right? The question of whether or not they are valid is reliable and sort of up for debate, right? The question of, do these memories occur because someone is probing for them? You're sort of leading them to remember things that may not have happened. Or are they actually remembering things that they have repressed? And memory researchers, so those that have investigated false memories, like we talked about related to eyewitness testimonies, they believe that repressed memories are inaccurate at best and sometimes false altogether, right? That they actually didn't happen. And they're sort of, because of the questions that can be asked and the way they're phrased in certain psychological therapy, you can lead someone to believe that they experienced a memory that they actually did not. Often, when a person is trying to recall an event and you're unable to remember the details around the event, that's the source of the memory becomes unclear or ambiguous, and you might even question, did that actually happen to me? I'm not sure. Am I remembering like a picture of something, or am I remembering what actually happened? And when this is probed over and over and over again, like in therapy, typically the individuals will end up fully believing that the event actually did happen, even if it didn't. And they'll construct details about the event that may not be accurate. So, similar to eyewitness testimonies, there's a huge controversy surrounding whether or not repressed memories are actually legitimate. Some therapists place a lot of weight on them and the authenticity of these repressed memories and their importance. But there are others who maintain that there's really not, at least as of now, there's not sufficient scientific support of the existence of these memories. We don't know enough yet. We don't have enough scientific data to support that these memories are actually happening the way that some researchers say that they are. So the challenge then becomes determining whether or not these memories are in fact true, especially if they're being used, for example, as a conviction. I think the book gives you an example of a man who much later in his adulthood years recalls these memories of being assaulted when he was a little boy by a priest. And these repressed memories were used as testimony to put that priest away in prison for life. So the question becomes, should these repressed memories be used for things like that? Are they accurate enough that we're willing to bet someone's life going to prison on it? Whether part of the details are accurate, or if the entire memory is accurate, or maybe if the memory never even actually occurred at all. So researchers on both sides of this argument, both for these repressed memories and those who say they're not accurate, they're continually looking for ways to explain whether or not these do occur. And if they do occur, maybe how accurate they may prove to be. So even if repressed memories are in fact a legitimate thing, are there still influences that are happening, especially if they're so traumatic that they were buried for years? Could they be influenced by things like emotion, or length of the memory not being recalled and things like that, that the details are not as accurate, right, as maybe they once would have been? And finally, we have something called autobiographical memory. So, this is a recollection of our own life experiences, and the same constructive processes that make us inaccurately recall the behavior of other people also reduces the accuracy of which we recall our own memories. It does happen, right? We don't recall these things with 100% accuracy. So, certain periods of our life are more easily remembered than others, such as transition points in our life. So, things like going through adolescence, moving on to attend college, starting a new career or a job. These memories are easier to recall than our day-to-day occurrence or events that occur between the transition periods. Additionally, we do tend to distort unpleasant events that happen to us. So, for example, a college student is less likely to remember accurately the number of bad grades they received, and rather they only remember all of the good grades they received, right? Um, we tend to recall negative or traumatic childhood experiences with very little accuracy or less accuracy, and they're not as easily remembered, at least all of the details surrounding it. Whereas more positive experiences are easily remembered and recounted. And that's all I have for chapter 6.